So Rico nearly cracked the Usyk code. The feints worked. The right hand mattered. The puzzle was real. But round 12 would have been a different territory. That is where fatigue exposes truth. And that is where the legs started to disappear. And once Rico lost his threat, Usyk would have walked through the front door and destroyed him. Now, is that perspective correct? Objectively, we will never know. But would Rico have survived the 12th round? Now, here's an argument that he wouldn't have survived. He would not have survived the 12th round. Now, think of this. Rico's feints, so the feints that Rico was using, it was keeping Usyk out of position. His power, his feints, and his head movement, they were the ultimate distraction. And also his right hand, his backhand from the orthodox position, it was a constant danger. And Usyk was aware of it. But at the end of round 11, here's the argument. Rico had lost the power in his legs, which is crucial, or it would have been crucial for his survival. Because without his legs, or without power in his legs, there is no power behind that right hand that kept Usyk at bay. That means the hand and the foot feints, they don't work. That means Usyk goes through the front door. Because the danger has effectively evaporated. The reason why Usyk is reacting to the feints is because he doesn't want to get hit with the left or the right. So let's play the scenario, hypothetical. If Rico clinches Usyk, which would be the smart thing to do, Usyk will put his hands on his chest, which negates the clinch, and then goes through the phases. This is something that Evander Holyfield used to do. If Rico throws the right hand, and if the premise is true, the premise that it has no power because he has no legs, then that's ineffective. And if Rico feints, that's also ineffective because, again, he's lost his power. Usyk, an intelligent boxer, will sense that he's lost his power, therefore the feints is ineffective, and this will enable him to open up. He will take that opportunity. From that standpoint, Rico does not survive. He gets knocked down again and beaten viciously. So before we get back to that main subject, I had this other question, and I've had so many questions with regards to this fight. And one of the questions was, how much credit does Rico deserve? From my perspective, and from the boxing world's perspective, and from the kickboxing world's perspective, it was an amazing performance from Rico. Think of this, he prepared and executed perfectly. Rico also made adaptations in the ring, and this was extremely impressive within the boxing context. He nearly solved the puzzle. Perhaps he gave Usyk his toughest test. It was a physical test, it was a psychological test, and it was an intellectual test. Usyk, who's known as a master of adaptation, struggled to solve the puzzle. And Rico, he provided that puzzle. It was a Rubik's Cube that caused Usyk discomfort and distress. Rico showed that he can compete with an elite heavyweight champion, considering his limited experience as a boxer. That is utterly remarkable. I mean, that's truly remarkable. Just imagine, reverse the roles. A boxer going into the kickboxing world and nearly dethroning an elite kickboxing champion. Imagine that. For that reason, Rico deserves an epic amount of respect. And I think this next question has some negative connotations, but I think it's important to ask the question. And that question is, was Usyk in shape? And I've been pondering this, and here is my thought process. When it comes to being in shape, we need to define what we mean. And I thought about this for a moment. And to my understanding, there's different categories. So you're in bad shape. Then there's being fit, but not in boxing shape. And then there's being in boxing shape. And then there's being in good boxing shape. And then there is being in elite boxing shape. So that's like, is that 5 phases? So we got bad shape, fit but not boxing shape, being in boxing shape, being in good boxing shape, and then being in elite boxing shape. So yes, that's 5 phases. So let's make some distinctions within those phases, right? So you can be fit but not in boxing shape. What's the difference? Well, I guess the difference is that you could be physically conditioned, or you could be conditioned with endurance, but not necessarily conditioned to take punches to the head and body. So you're conditioned in terms of, you can do the movements and you can throw the punches, but you can't absorb the pain. So that could be being fit, but not in boxing shape. Usyk, I would say, generally is in elite boxing shape. That is the expectation, and that is one of his underestimated weapons. That is what separates him from others. But in this fight, and when I say this fight, I'm talking about the Rico fight. In the Rico fight, I think he wasn't in bad shape, but I think he wasn't in boxing shape. And he definitely was not in elite boxing shape. But that's my perception. Of course, I could be wrong. So in a sense, what we can derive from that is that Rico did not fight an elite Usyk. He fought a Usyk that was in boxing shape, but Rico prepared for an elite Usyk and gave an elite performance. There's just one more point to make there, and that is it's not Rico's fault if Usyk doesn't come into elite conditioning. That's Usyk's responsibility. So I'm not trying to take away from Rico's performance. So again, let's go back to the initial question. Could Rico have survived round 12? So let's look at this again. So I'd say Usyk is known for finishing fights strongly. Is that premise true? Well, if you look at the 2 Anthony Joshua fights, Usyk found new gears. In the first fight, he nearly got a stoppage in the last round. And in the second fight, I think it was round 10, he just took off, Matrix level. So based on previous experience, i.e. the Anthony Joshua fights, Usyk would have upped the tempo. He would have the potential to do that. And the important part to this matrix is that Rico was tired, but he was not just tired, he was tired and hurt. So that's 2 phases. He's tired and he's hurt. And Rico has absolutely huge legs, and they would have struggled to avoid Usyk from getting in position. And Usyk obviously needs to get into position to unleash those punches. Remember, in the fight, Rico kept Usyk cautious. Why? Because he was using the feints and the threat of the right hand. But if you take away the legs, you take away the power, and therefore the threat is now dissipated, or it's disappeared. So Rico, I would say, was elite for 10.5 rounds, but the gas tank, figuratively speaking, was empty. And Usyk, I believe, was ready to put in a strong finish. He was ready to go to the next gear. So I think the evidence points to Usyk destroying Rico in round 12. You can break this down in phases. Phase 1, Usyk hurt his opponent. Phase 2, the threat of the right hand had been nullified. Phase 3, round 12, is unfamiliar territory for Rico. And finally, phase 4, Usyk's asset is his conditioning. He still had other gears. On one hand, it's a shame that there was not the opportunity to have a more decisive victory. I say more decisive because the outcome was not decisive to the boxing public. So let's give the counter argument where Rico survives. So if Rico is able to hold Usyk, this would be effective because Rico is a very, very strong individual, very physically powerful. I actually underestimated that. And it's a big if Rico gets his legs back, then there's the footwork issue. And Usyk has been struggling with Rico's footwork for like 11 rounds. And if Rico gets his legs back, that backhand is back in the picture. If Usyk is over-aggressive and Rico with his legs under him is able to land a right hand, what is the potential outcome? Let's think about it. Let's break it down in phases. Phase 1, Usyk gets hit with the right hand and then he gets cautious and retreats. That can enable Rico to survive. Phase 2, Usyk is badly hurt and then Rico has an opportunity and then he has to make some decisions. And then we have phase 3, Usyk gets knocked down or knocked out. And then you have phase 4, Usyk goes back to feints and then intelligently tries to create another opening. Also, additionally to this, If Rico puts his weight on his back foot, he becomes a stronger target, harder to move. Now remember, with the knockdown in round 11, Rico put his head on his front foot, and therefore he was caught by that right uppercut from Usyk from the southpaw position. So there is an argument to be made that Rico could have survived round 12. Nothing is objective here. Nothing is objective. It's all subjective. There is no absolute truth. But there's definitely a good logical argument that he would be destroyed in round 12. But you can also make an argument that perhaps he comes back and survives round 12. Now, with regards to Rico, I'm liking some of the interviews that he is doing. He looks like he is media trained, intelligent, calm, but very respectful. And I like that. He is definitely creating a new narrative for the rematch, or a narrative for the rematch. Of course, when we look at Rico, there is so much new potential. There are so many other potentially great matchups. Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Daniel Dubois, Moses Atama, all of these potentially would be great fights. And like I said, there is potentially a great future for Rico in boxing. So that's the end of the video. I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content, then click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.